Speaking of reading, looks like the good habits of reading Rainbow has followed us into our young adulthood here. And you and I have recently discovered a compilation of research articles in a beautiful book, and it has since become an obsession for reading and analyzing. And we're actually going to bring it to the podcast today on nurturing our nature. And it's about the psychology of habits. I want to give a proper introduction with the title of the book here. The editor is Bas Verplanken. The title is The Psychology of Habit, Theory, Mechanisms, Change, and Context. This is published by Springer. And the editor was from the Department of Psychology at the University of Bath in Bath, UK.
I took a bath today.
I haven't taken a bath in a while. I do showers.
Yeah.
Not baths. I don't mind baths though. I would definitely dive in.
I'll take a bath and then take a shower afterwards to wash my hair.
Oh, gotcha. Now you just gotta dunk your head in the bath first. You just dunk it. You just get down there, submerge underneath the rubber duckies, get a little bath bomb going.
Rubber ducky.
Hey, Timothy Frog here. We had to back up from the.
Amongst all these rubber duckies, I find that when I submerge my head in the water, my hair comes out cleaner.
Mr. Frog, you don't have hair.
You don't have hair. You're just a frog.
He does have this really cool collar. You ever notice that?
Oh, I thought you were gonna say nipple tassels.
Kermit don't even got those.
No, you're indicating down here. I was like,
and you couldn't see. No. He's got this collar. It's like the spiked collar on his.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is that? I don't know if that's hair. Maybe that's like a special toad necklace. Anyways, Bath, UK, the book Psychology of Habit. So there's 4 key points about habits. We all have habits in our lives, and whether we know it or not, every day is full of them. There's things that we just go about and enter this autopilot mode, and we've just incorporated these habits day to day. And maybe each day has different habits. Maybe your work day habits are different from your off day habits, but we all have them. We'll go into depth more later, but if you notice, the more you do something, the more habitual it becomes. A great analogy in the book was how water flowing across sand, a little mound of sand, will leave an imprint across the sand, and any further stream of water is going to follow that imprint left in the sand, which was their way of implying that habits are a form of finding more efficient ways of doing the same task, till eventually we just have this efficient flow that we enter. In that way, you're making decisions kind of automatically based on the habit that you're doing and your previous experience of doing so, versus having to make acute pivotal choices every time you have to move to a different location or make a certain decision, whether it be at the grocery store. If you've been to a grocery store 100 times, you really don't even have to think about where you're going, the path you take to get everything that you need. Whereas if it's your first time in a new grocery store in a new location, you might spend a bit more time breaking down what aisle you want to go into to find everything that you need. So habits are just you being able to do this efficiently based on your previous experiences. And eventually you reach a point where you have these habits that have been driven before you even knew what goal you were trying to achieve. Other times the goals are hedonistic. They're just for pleasure. And sometimes they're more practical, getting you from point A to point B. But you could even reach a point where the goal fades and you're just left with these habits that you have. So Daniel, do you mind if I read that description of what a habit is? I know you're going to explain other definitions that you came across in your readings as well.
Go for it, bro.
But in the book, they take into account a lot of different research articles over the past 100+ years, as well as theories from philosophers of our time. And they came to this conclusion that for the sake of this book and simplifying the definition of a habit, they called it a memory-based propensity to respond automatically to specific cues. I want to remember that, cues, which are acquired by the repetition of cue-specific behaviors in stable context. So it's all memory-based, and the cues are what really started the drive and will keep you going every time. So
I think
there's
a couple things. There's a couple things in there that I want to kind of drill further into. I'll go to the first half of what you're saying. So you're kind of discussing like that default mode where you're basically like you're going through your day and you're basically doing these different activities without much thought behind them. Psychologists Evan and Stanovich both kind of describe that phenomenon that you're talking about. So they called it the System 1 versus System 2 approach. So basically, System 1 makes minimal demands on your working memory, and System 2 essentially makes executive demands that can change or inhibit the system as it is functioning. System 1 is the one that is more like, it's like your more automatic system. It's the faster default mode system versus System 2, which is kind of like when you want to make changes, when you want to call something to mind, like it's that New Year's resolution time. You're like, I really want this new habit. I want to get in the gym and I want to get fit. That's where System 2 kicks in. But what happens over time is, and the goal is to actually move stuff over to System 1, because System 2 is very demanding. Mm-hmm. It's actually, this can be demonstrated calorically as well, because we know that when you have more activation of your executive function regions, your prefrontal cortex, for example, like that's more calorically demanding than it would be if you were to operate on, what was it called? It's the sensory motor loop. I'm going to get more into like the specifics of that later, but basically when you offload from that associative loop into the sensory motor loop, you spend less effort, less calories, and you require less to actually like operate on day-to-day functions. And it's less like a willpower basis, because this has also been demonstrated in psychological literature that we as humans have limited willpower. Like, this is a really interesting phenomenon where like if you have to constantly restrict yourself from certain activities every single day, it's going to become that much harder for you to do things that are like self-improvement based. So if I have to constantly say no to like high fat, high sugar foods that I'm being surrounded with at my work, like that's going to wear me down over time. And eventually what's going to happen, let's say you're at finals week and you're super stressed, you don't have any more willpower left. You're just going to eat all those fatty foods and you're going to binge. So the goal, this is based off of the first half of what you're saying, the goal is to move us into like positive habits within that more automatic mode. The term is coined in the book, automaticity. You want the positive automaticity to take over, where you're participating in habits that are essentially building yourself up. Because there's also bad habits as well, where you can like go into default mode that tears you down. For example, binging and watching television at the same time, where over time what that leads to is poor health. So the goal is to move us into positive habits within that System 1.
Yeah, it seems like System 2, like you said, I like that you mentioned calorically more efficient, or System 2 is calorically more demanding rather, whereas System 1 is more streamlined. You're still performing the same tasks. Let's say you're going to the gym and you're taking someone who's going to the gym on System 2. They're going for the first time. It's New Year's, and it's taking a lot of willpower for them just to get there. And then you have the same person walking in the door next to them. If they're on System 1, they've been going to the gym for like 10 years now. They're both doing the same task. They're both opening the door and going into that gym. But the person on System 2, person that's building that habit, that New Year's resolution for the first time, they are going through a lot more for mental expenditures just to get themselves there, let alone now they have to walk in and do a whole workout routine with machines that they've never seen before, possibly, you know? It's all very novel to them, and they have to go through and not even going into the detail on the strenuous on their body because they're doing it for the first time compared to the other person who's got the muscle buildup. But just mentally speaking, the person on the second pathway, it's very difficult. And then the extra challenge comes, can they come January 2nd? Can they come back January 3rd, January 4th? Because it's not like they just come January 1st and they're on a perfect, oh, I'm on path 1 now, super easy, and just go to the gym tomorrow and the next day and the next day. You know, it takes a while to switch over from that really strenuous, what'd you call it, the second?
Yep. System two is the more demand on executive function.
Right. It's not, how long would you say, like, I mean, I'm sure it changes from person to person, and there's plenty of factors that it depends on, as I know from the skimming.
The literature suggests 90 days is how long it takes essentially to jumpstart a habit.
Jumpstart. Wow, imagine 90 days to jump your car. 90 days. That's quite the commitment, you know? And many times it's not just a matter of starting a new habit, it's also sometimes you're replacing an old one. So you have like the difficulty of, in that 90 days, you have to break bad habits and replace them with a good one. It can make it even harder to switch over from system 2 to system 1. Then you just fall back into your complacent bad habits that are already on system 1. That's the crazy part. To get those system 2 good habits, you have to overcome the system 1 cues that you've built, the efficiency that you have towards those bad habits.
We can't call system 2 necessarily a habit, though, because system 2.
In this example, I simply meant, like, if system 2 is going to the gym for the first time, like if you have a person, Bob, he has a current bad habit that's on the system 1, which is sitting at home watching TV after work. Then you have Bob also trying to go to the gym because it's New Year's and he wants to start that new habit after work, going to the gym. So for Bob, going to the gym is something that he's starting, and it's in this high cost system 2. Right. And whereas going and watching TV after work, that's still on his low cost system 1 pathway. Right. So in this example, he has to not only go through the strenuous cost of building that gym habit that's still on system 2, and it takes 90 days for that to switch over to system 1, but he also has to break the system 1 habit. You know, I might be making this more complicated than it already is, but I'm simply trying to say it's difficult. That's my point, to go and get something onto system 1 and to get it to that natural flow, because there's a lot of challenges in those 90 days.
Right. So I think a key defining factor of habits as well is that these habits will occur without the necessity for a reward. That's one of the key defining features of a habit. And in addition to that, habits are also defined by their contextual dependence. So I'm going to go to that definition. That's really, I think it summarizes everything very nicely. So habits, I'm going to break this down. Habits are defined as cue response associations in memory that are acquired slowly through the repetition of an action in stable circumstances. So let me break down that first part. Cue responses associated within the memory. Basically what that means is, instead of us consciously having to have some kind of goal-oriented behavior, instead, let's say when I go to a hotel and I see a gym, as soon as I walk in, like behind the front desk area, you see like this gym area, automatically, like I'm not in the gym, I'm not like I'm not even like consciously saying I need to get my butt in the gym. It's like No, the second that I see that, there's the context presented to me right there. Immediately, what happens is I'm like, yo, I'm going to work out in like an hour. The second you're presented with that context, that's how you know. You don't need like conscious goal-directed behavior. As long as you put yourself in the direct environment, like that is super predictive of you being in a habit for the thing that you're doing. So the next part of that is acquired slowly through the repetition. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Repetition is hugely predictive of you being able to create an actual habit. And like I said, it's that 90-day period that you kind of want to go through of repeating this thing. But the next part is stable circumstances. So in order for you to create that context dependence, you have to have circumstances in those 90 days that are like relatively reliable. So if you're constantly like shifting, let's say you're constantly moving or you do travel work, that sort of thing, like that makes it a lot more difficult for you to establish a habit. We know that contextual, like there's different elements. Like if I see that it is, let's say 5 o'clock, and I've developed this habit of reading a book every single day at 5 o'clock. But let's say that I take up like a new job that's shift work and I'm up like late at night. Like that shift in relative repetition throughout the day makes it more difficult for me to be able to establish a habit. So if I have very like predictable elements, those elements in themselves become the context for which I perform that habit. So let me define those elements of context really quick too. That's going to be physical location, time of day, and then preceding actions in a sequence. So when I put myself in a physical location and I look around and I see certain pieces that kind of trigger my memory, I'm going to be more likely to participate in that habit. When that time of day hits, and let's say it's like 9 o'clock and I start winding down for my bedtime, which is 10 o'clock, time of day is a huge, like, it sets the context for you committing to that habit. So if every single day for 90 days you commit to like a pre-bed ritual at 9 p.m., by 10 p.m. you'll be out because you've essentially created the context of 9 p.m. being your time that you prepare for bed, and then preceding actions in a sequence. Like for me, pre-workout before I go to the gym, like if I take pre-workout, I already know like I'm going to the gym that day. There's no questions. Like it's a context. It's a piece of the whole puzzle that where I connect that piece, I'm gonna go through with that habit.
Would you say that the context and the continuity context can be controlled when you get some sort of self-awareness over the cues that encourage that habit? In other words, the context is the environmental cues that drive you towards making this execution of a behavior until it eventually becomes a habit.
It's really interesting because when something shifts towards becoming a habit, the book kind of talked about how it's actually like a very subconscious thing. Like when it's actually reached like the status of habit, like it would take you like really diving into your subconscious mind to see like, at this time of day, I've noticed that I get these outcomes from my behaviors. Is there a habit there? Like that sort of thing. It's a very, if it's actually truly a habit, that's one of the defining factors, is that it kind of just occurs automatically without goal-directed behavior, without the need for like a reward outside of that. So are you asking like if I create a certain environment, like am I going to be more likely to do these things? Because that would require that you essentially become aware of the habit, which by nature, being a habit is very
difficult.
Very difficult because it becomes subconscious.
Difficult, but not impossible.
No, not impossible.
Simply the observation of your day-to-day habits every day. I'm sure any one of us can come to terms with certain habits that we might have. Even as simple, I would say, like, look at the habits of things that you do before or after eating, because it's like something that we do every day. Or like you brought up, sleeping. And you'll notice, I'm pretty sure everyone can think of one or two examples of, oh yeah, every time after I eat, I do this, or after I wake up in the morning, I do this, before I go to bed, I do that. And just being able to understand why that is a habit might be a bit more complex. Like you said, really diving into maybe they have a long childhood history of doing this same task, when they wake up in the morning. Or maybe it's just something that's convenient due to their environment and their like work schedule. And that's why they drink coffee every time they wake up in the morning. It could definitely vary from person to person. I simply was saying, is cues and context, are those interchangeable? Are cues are things that your body picks up on in order to promote a behavior? Is that the same as the continuity and the context, like you were mentioning? Or is continuity more so something that's more generic? Like you said, it's simply time of day, location, and the ritual, like you said, of things that you do before and after that habit formed behavior. And are cues something more specific, like certain like specific triggers that might lead someone to doing something?
I think within the context you have cues. So
Right. Okay.
I can interchange the word context and environment. That, like, those two would pretty much mean the same thing. So my environment has many cues within it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I place myself in an environment that makes it more conducive to a set of habits, like I have lots of food around me, and every time this certain time of day hits, I'm going to eat because I'm surrounded by food, the environment, the context. The cue itself, I would say, would be the action.
Of like seeing the food, like smelling the food.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think they're definitely related. And it's something that I think you brought up a great point, that when you have been doing a habit, when you have been performing the same task for much part of your life, for many years, it can be difficult to even recognize why you're doing what you do. Because at this point, you've already fortified the behavior so much that you don't even put processed energy into thinking about why you're doing it. You just know that it's what gets done at this time.
Right. It switches from goal dependence to context dependence. That's what a habit essentially becomes. Like, you are no longer requiring goal-directed behavior. It's now like, okay, I'm smelling this thing, I guess it's time to eat. It's like a habit. Or like, this time of day is hit. You don't even really consciously think about it. Like, and it's crazy too, because your neurobiology will start to match this. Like if you have a pre-bed ritual and you're trying to get better sleep around 10 o'clock every night, like, your neurobiology is going to match that. You're going to start secreting melatonin around 9 p.m. And you're going to feel that your body starts to slow down a little bit, and it's going to match. It's going to match essentially that habit, which is really cool, because that's more or less, it's not like the latest neuroscience, but it's pretty new with what's coming out.
It shows that the biochemistry matches up with the psychology.
Right. And part of that is neural networks. Okay. So I kind of talked about it a little bit, but we have an associative loop. So that comprises of our basal ganglia, caudate nucleus, and our favorite executive functioner, the essentially part of our personality that is super important, the prefrontal cortex. So the associative loop is essentially like where you start building the habit. It's that first 90 days is when you spend time within the associative loop. But as you perform that task more frequently, you're going to activate a new neural network, and you're going to find that this habit that you're trying to form, it's not initially a habit, but it becomes a habit when you switch to the sensory motor loop. This is the loop that's more in charge. It's a neuromotor network, essentially, that commits you to action, and it's automatic. It has a lot of automaticity. That's the word that they use. And so that's the sensory motor loop that's in charge of automatic action, which consists of something called the putamen. That's a basal ganglia. Like, it's like a dark region of cells within the brain, which, fun fact, we learned about this in neuroscience. It's like when you injure that, you actually have something called left-sided neglect, where you're not aware of like this side of your body. It's really interesting. If you damage your putamen, you for some reason you stop paying attention to one whole half of your body, which is really interesting. And then you have sensory motor cortices and parts of the midbrain. And we know that the midbrain is essentially like a more primitive region of the brain. So that says a lot when we know that, the sensory motor loop comprises of a key element, the midbrain. So it's like we're moving from the front part of our brain down to more basal ganglia and more midbrain function. So there's some good neuroscience that's come out, and I kind of just wanted to dive into that a little bit.
Nice.
And some of the studies that I came across too in the book, they estimated that 43% of everyday actions are habitual. So if that is the case, I will pose you this question.
Pose it.
43% of what we do every single day is essentially automatic. And we could probably round that up to 50%. So let's say half of what you do every single day is essentially automatic.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it that we select the right habits?
I ask myself this every day.
It's a dumb question, but it sounds like a dumb question.
It's really not. It's really not a dumb question. The habits make the man, right? The habits make who you are today and what you become. We do have control over our habits, over our behavior, but it takes a lot of practice to redirect. If you already find that you have habits in place, which you do, as Daniel mentioned here, about 40% of what you do daily is a habit. If you ever find like you need to rewire or rework those habits, it's going to take a lot of practice and determination. And as you mentioned earlier too, you only have so much willpower, and you have limited resources when it comes to being on habits and behaviors that are already on autopilot mode versus ones that you have to make an effort to actually execute. And yeah, there's a lot of habitual thoughts, a lot of habitual actions that we go about day to day, that many of them are done because of what we prioritize, whether it be our physical or mental health, our financial stability, our relationships with friends and families. It really depends on what you prioritize in life, that I think it starts to build those habits most of the time subconsciously. It's just, you know what's important. And you might not directly have a link, like you said before, between your habits and those goals, but they might be related somewhat. And that's kind of what ends up making your livelihood and your daily habits, your daily actions. until you're eventually not even thinking about what it is that you're doing. You just kind of go through those motions. Do you think that if we did have the self-awareness, let's say you gave yourself the self-awareness to be able to acknowledge those 40% of habits, I guess what everyone should be able to do is have an exercise of which of those do you want to keep and which of those are unnecessary or even bad for you sometimes.
I think that would take, it's a very individual thing. So that would take the individual asking, like, am I happy with the trajectory of my life right now? And if you can answer that confidently and be like, yes, there's nothing I want to change, which likely the answer to that will be, nah, I'm a human, I'm imperfect, and there's a lot that I could always get better on. But when you ask that question, and then let's say the answer is I'm unhappy with my health choices, I think that's the key right there. And being able to create a stable environment to essentially create a new habit is super important. Some of the literature in the book talked about how unstable performance context is a big predictor for habit dissolution.
Yeah.
So
that's actually a later chapter that I'm really excited to get into.
Nice.
As you can see, the thought of being able to break habits is something that I find very interesting because I think it's applicable for most people in life. Once you get past the point of having the self-awareness to recognize what it is you want to change, this book has a great discussion on the mechanisms involved for helping your body reach a point where it's almost like you find a point of discontinuity where you can destabilize whatever habit you want to change. And then you also have, as you mentioned, methods of forming continuities in order to strengthen habits that you want to create.
Right.
It's almost like we said earlier about the context and the cues. Once you have the ability to associate the context cues to whatever behavior it is that you're doing or want to do, I think that kind of gives you a leg up because you have control over those things. You might have control. I mean, I'm assuming that you have free will. And if you do, then you might have the ability to control the environment that you're in, or at least some of the cues in your recent environment so that you can perform a certain behavior at a certain time of day. And sometimes people don't even perform best at certain times of day. But like for whatever task that it is that they're associating or trying to associate with that time. But this book does a great job of describing the benefits of doing so. And you've done a great job of describing the biochemical relations that our body begins to make when you actually correlate time of day with a behavior, and the outcome can many times be aligned with that biochemistry, which is incredible.
Right. And it's like biohacking almost. Like when you're aware, like we all have a chronotype. Funny enough, I looked into this. I guess my chronotype is bear chronotype, but basically it means that like I do better waking up around like 10 p.m. or so. And then if I wake up earlier than that, I'm not going to be like neurochemically primed to be doing my best work. So if let's say I wake up at 7 o'clock and I'm like, yo, by 8 o'clock, I'm going to be sitting down grinding super hard and I'm going to do my best work. It's like realistically, like everybody has a different chronotype. And if you realize that like, yo, around this time every single day, I feel sharp as shit. Like I'm on it. I have tons of energy. My drive and my focus essentially lends it for me to be able to hit flow state better. Like you should almost like take advantage of that. If you notice like every single day, I'm like super sharp around 12 o'clock. Like that's when I want to do my best work. I would say the creative work is probably like way up there. So like, for example, preparing for a podcast episode, I'm going to want to do that at 12 o'clock because I know that I'm going to be able to really sit there, synthesize, create my own ideas, have my own thoughts about it the best at that point in time. Versus like, let's say a 9 p.m. at night type of thing. What am I going to do there? I'm going to do my stretches. I'm going to do some like casual reading. I'm going to kind of do things to like turn my body down a little bit, just kind of relax, because I know I can't really cognitively perform as high as I would be at like 12 o'clock.
I've actually seen those tests. I'm curious to try one myself. I might have the goldfish chronotype. I like to just float around. just eat the food as it floats down to the bottom. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think what's funny is that those chronotypes, those chronotype tests, and the little comparisons that they have to the animals, with all the visuals aside, I think that's a perfect example of the averages or the similarities between people that have this biochemical and psychological behavior that has overlapped in order to be beneficial for them to perform at certain times of the day. And I'm sure you're not the only one that performs best at 10 a.m., but there's no doubt that there are people out there that perform best at 6 a.m. And it really just depends on the behaviors and the habits, I think, that they have had. Because imagine there's someone who's been, for lack of better phrasing, imagine someone that's been lazy, most of their life. Do you think they're going to take this chrono test and it's like, you're actually early bird chronotype. You work best at 6 a.m. I highly doubt that, because they're going to take that test and they're going to answer the questions in a way that lend themselves to their lazy habits and behaviors that have persisted till now. And right. The chronotype, or as they call it, that they're going to achieve or they're going to be assigned is essentially something that's going to encourage them to wake up later or go to sleep later. Maybe that's like the night owl one, right? You've seen that a lot. But without talking badly about it, what I'm trying to say is that even those people that have had lazy habits or lazy behaviors that have encouraged their body to only perform in the later times of the day versus in the earlier times of the day, even those people can take advantage of how their body is performing today in order to improve and to work on stuff productively. They just need to understand that it might be easier for them to do so right now by taking advantage of how their body is currently wired, rather than maybe forcing it to rewire instantly and be like, oh, this person has to start waking up at 6 a.m. if they want to have any kind of potential in improving their habits or productivity. But with that said, what if someone that was lazy and wanted to change their habits, what if in order to do so, they needed to create a drastic change in the continuity that they currently have in order to break the bad ones? That could also be a different approach as well. Whether you want to strengthen new habits or current habits by doing what your body's already wired for, or forcing your body to rewire itself by placing yourself in a completely foreign environment with new cues and new times.
Which is totally possible. We're super adaptive neuroplastic creatures. Like that's one of the key elements of being human, is that so much of our brain is able to rewire itself. And we know this from like traumatic brain injury cases, like individuals who have like had a huge chunk of their brain damaged, they're able to compensate for it because the brain is so neuroplastic. You give them a couple years and they're able to completely reverse some of the motor damage that they might have with like proper, like I've seen it with physical therapy. Like guy came in with Guillain-Barré, which is a neurological disease that freaking messes you up and you can't even walk. Dude, within like 2 months, this guy was literally, he walked himself out of the hospital. Like humans, whether that be like on a psychological level or like a motor level, like we're so adaptable and so neuroplastic. Like it's totally possible. Like if you really set your mind to it, I think you can overcome any kind of natural biological hurdles and realistically like taper your biology to become functional. Even if you say you're a night person and you take the chronotype test, which you might skew it, like you said, you can totally skew these subjective things. But change is totally possible in so many different domains.
Yeah, I think it's really a matter of being able to properly interpret what's causing these automatic responses, what's causing you to behave the way that you do. And it takes I mean, I can only imagine the vast differences between person to person when it comes to how they analyze why is that they do what they do. Because I'm sure there's a few levels of honesty that they have to break through in order to get to the truth of why they perform that task at that time of day, before this, before that, after this.
Isn't that crazy? Bro, we literally, oh my gosh, I don't even want to get too started on this.
We lie to ourselves.
We lie to ourselves.
For
Isn't
a
that
bunch
crazy?
of levels before we finally get to the point where
we want to perform to the ideal self, like the ideal vision that you have of the person that you want to be. You'll even lie to yourself on a survey to make you like live as that person that you want to be.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. That's something that I've experienced myself when looking at certain habits and going through this reading as well. This wonderful book describes that there's really levels to this point of being able to almost intentionally misinterpret or almost intentionally kind of give yourself some kind of mental reasoning as to why you're doing this habit, and that allows the behavior to progress for years if you let it, before finally sitting there and being honest with yourself and saying, okay, why is it that I'm doing this? Why is my body craving this?
Right.
And I think it depends on a lot of things in the environment. I think even society plays a role into this, because there could be things that society doesn't want you to question. They're like, oh, just do this, it's good for you. I mean, look at like cigarettes, back like just 40, 50 years ago. It was so normalized by society that you were doing it. And then whenever you had a moment to be like, why am I doing this? Before you even reach the level of honesty as to why you were smoking cigarettes, you probably could just convince yourself with, oh, it's cool. Look at Joe Camel. That's why I do this.
Bro, it's crazy. Because even back then, though, the doctors were saying, oh, it's healthy for you. Like that's one of those big, like,
yeah.
face palm things.
Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons for that, but it's pretty insane to think that, I know that cigarettes could be extremely addictive. Obviously, there's a warning label on anything nicotine related, but, I think it's insane that before, like 50 years ago, it was just so normalized that you didn't even need to spend the mental energy to tell yourself that it was wrong. You just did it because it was a norm, a cultural norm at that point.
Right.
What do you think if you were able to, I mean, I know there's people today that, they've got oxygen tanks and they smoke with the oxygen in their nose. It's insane. It's insane. And then not to mention the it's not safe, obviously, to smoke in general, but don't ever do that, because their oxygen tends to be a little explosive around open flames. So sometimes you can get like burned by doing that. But isn't it crazy that these people know the risk of smoking? They're already damaged by smoking, and then they're taking an additional risk by smoking with this oxygen tank in their face, and they still do it. I mean, I'd like to ask.
It is crazy. It's like, and that goes into like some of the addiction psychology, which is like, even though you know the risks associated with it, you know that it's not good for you, that short-term reward is so much more valuable to you. And I think part of it comes down to like, you don't mentally and psychologically, you don't put this in the front of your mind, like moving it into that system 2. Essentially, this is system 2 is part of breaking down addictive habits, by the way. Mm-hmm. You don't move it into that system 2, essentially, to be like, yo, I think there's something more that I could be getting out of my life if I didn't have this negative habit. Like it's almost like you have to at some point make the psychological shift to say that I prioritize this long-term reward over the shorter term. But in order for that to happen, you have to expend a lot of willpower. And that's actually really uncomfortable, like on many different levels. Like when you have to expend more effort, more energy, when you could just settle into your system one. Like that's a huge thing with addictive behaviors and addictive habits, I should say. So it's like, it's a matter of like, how can you, well, the person has to want it, you know? Like, I think at the end of the day, that's like the most important thing. Like, you can have society telling you now we're all aware that smoking's terrible for you. Like, that's a generally accepted like thing in like society right now, which is good. We've made some good moves, but it's like, even if the person is aware, it's like, it's up to them to then be like, I want to live a healthier life. Like, and only then at that point can they then open themselves up to expressing or expending the willpower to make the change in that context of system 2.
Yeah. And, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy to overcome these habits, especially when you're dealing with addiction. I've seen this many times on the internet, or there'll be memes of people, whether they're going through an addiction or they're depressed, and then the mom kind of walks in the room and she's like, just stop being sad, be happy. And then the guy's like, thanks, I'm cured. And he's like, starts levitating. Like, I understand it's not that easy. And part of this podcast, especially as we dive into this textbook, this research compilation of psychology and habits, part of it is going to be giving ourselves and sharing with you all the tools of how to look at our mind and how to understand the mechanisms at work there, and also how to look at our environment in order to build something that encourages the habits that we want to promote and discourages the habits that we want to cease. Because at the end of the day, a habit is just a behavior. It's just a behavior that has consistently happened over and over again until your mind has put it into this system 1 level of autopilot, of automaticity. And
right,
to be able to overcome these bad ones, it takes a lot of work. Recognizing it, being aware of it is simply the first step. But being able to
discussing that it's uncomfortable, I think that is so important to, like, for you and I to have this discussion that changing behavior is uncomfortable for up to like 90 days. Like, I think that can really help people. Like, if people are aware that like there's sunshine on the horizon, if I can just get beyond this point and shift into a more system 1 approach with a positive habit, it's like, I'm so happy that we're having this discussion, because it's like, when we bring awareness to the fact that changing aspects of yourself, like habits eventually make up your personality in some sense, like changing aspects of yourself is a very uncomfortable experience. Like, because of how much effort it takes, how much caloric expenditure, you actually literally, you expend more calories when you have to think about it more. Like, it's less in that comfort zone. So it's like, it's getting you into that, like, embracing the discomfort type of mindset. And like, when you can hit that stage, and as we have this discussion, it's like, that in itself can end up becoming a habit. Like, the habit of desiring to become a better version of you. Like, you can build that as a habit. Like, I'm starting to get used to this sensation of like discomfort, and I'm realizing that, like, as I step into this, there's this part of myself I don't like. For example, I'm gonna have to step into it again. I want to be more social again. For 90 days, what do I need to do? I need to get out there and have small talk. Literally, bro.
This doesn't count, by the way. I'm not signing off on this.
Hey, bro. Hey, this feeds my introvert self. I'm sitting here, like, introverts one-on-one, bro. Like, I'm an ambivert. I'm an ambivert, but like the 50% of me that's introverted, like, I can do this for hours and hours and hours, bro. I love this, man. This
I'm
is
an
just
amphibian.
Like...
I'm an amphibian. I'm a frog.
Hi-oh.
Hey, it's me, Kimber the Frog here. I'll tell you what, it's definitely impressive when you look at it, because, like you said at the beginning, there's a level of goal independence where the actual goal at some point just dissipates and you just have a habit, left. So I think just being honest with yourself and being able to kind of like realign, because you might be promoting habits or behaviors that had a goal at one point. They might have had some kind of purpose for making you feel better, for making you look better, for making you achieve more. Or maybe simply their purpose was just to distract you from stressors in your environment. But now they're just autopilot, you know? And you kind of have to sit back and kind of recognize, like, okay, do I want to keep, like you said earlier, do I want to keep going down the trajectory that I have with the habits that I've built for myself today? Or do I want to realign myself to form new habits and new behaviors?
Right.
I'm really excited to keep going to this book because I feel like the early research is simply just posing what habits are and how research has kind of looked at the logic of a habit. But I really want to break into the actual tools and the methods of observing habits. And I know that there's actually within the research, even though these papers are relatively up to date, very modern research. I know they take into account research from years and years and years ago. But this is a pretty modern day compilation, and even then, they're still debating the theoretical versus the operational definitions of a habit. And there's a lot of implicit ways of looking at this. So I'm very curious as we move forward here to kind of keep breaking this down.
I really like kind of like what you're saying. This book gives you like a nice overview on like all the different trains of thought and all the different theories underpinning what we have thought that habit formation might be. So like behaviorism was the first approach. We used to think that habits were simply conditioning, stimulus and response. So if I get a reward for doing this thing, then I'm going to keep doing that thing. Like that was the behaviorism approach that we used to have.
Right.
And it then historically moved into a more cognitive view, which suggests that people act by making decisions and then pursuing goals. And then we moved into another theory. This one was coined by Triandis, which is the theory of interpersonal behavior. People can act both out of habit and intention. But in this theory, it's key. It suggests that habit is weighted on repetition. So that was like an earlier theory that we had. And all of these like ended up forming what we have today, along with the neuroscience that we have, which is sick. It's like neuroscience and modern psychology are now like, they're so closely linked. And it's beautiful to see how modern biology and psychology are kind of like, they're forming into this, it's cognitive neuroscience, as that's the discipline. It's starting to really become a beautiful science that I'm excited to see where it goes. But now the more modern definition, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, habit formation is now, instead of it being very goal, stimulus oriented, it's now like you put yourself in an environment and you become automatic within that environment. And that's the more modern definition that we have based off of this book. So like, it's really cool to see like how over time, all the different theories leading into our understanding of habit formation have changed.
Yeah, because you definitely could tell that the perspective of the people in the past and the people today, it changes as our technology improves and as our education, the knowledge available in these respective fields grows to the point where now they're overlapping. And it really is incredible. There's a few examples I can think of. One of them being like how FBI studied, the behaviors of criminals, and especially when you go to the criminals that are psychologically disturbed. There was a point where psychological analysis and behavior analysis of criminals was kind of like some hippie talk, It's literally just like, nah, it's really simple. It's like this guy did a bad thing because his wife cheated on him, and like straightforward, that's it, or like this guy did a bad thing because he's addicted to drugs, and that's it. Like they don't really go into detail about like why, what's driving these people. And then, now I'm sure there's so much forensic studies and there's so much psychological in-depth reviews of types of criminals and types of behaviors. And that's just like one example of how these fields are really starting to bleed together, because we're really complicated creatures. But after acknowledging and recording so much data the way we have in the past, 50 years or so, we're starting to realize that as complex as we might be on an individual level, there's definitely similarities across each of us that can be explained. And then we can then take those and adapt them to how we function and what cues we have in our environment and what behaviors we have today in order to change what we want for tomorrow.
Right.
So I'm just really excited. I feel like we just barely tapped into it today and we've just been going and going. But
dude, next chapters are going to be lit. I can't wait.
So let's definitely discuss that. I think whether we do it here or on Clubhouse, I think there'd be a great opportunity for us to dive into at least some kind of review of the next few chapters. And then we can also have an in-depth analysis of our own opinions on it as well. Bringing in examples outside of this textbook might also be pretty useful because there's a lot to go off of here. And I think it'd be really powerful if we brought in as many examples as possible, because the depth of research in these articles can be kind of overwhelming simply to articulate. But I think being able to bring some kind of analogy or bring some kind of example, whether it be speakers or historical context of people in our cultures and such, and see how that applies to the research that we see today, as well as obviously giving all the respect to the researchers that have given themselves and their time to developing this field to what we are so curiously exploring.
Right.
All right. All right. Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you. So how do you feel?
I feel like...
Do you feel like you reached a point where you're going about your day to day and you're seeing the cues, you're seeing the writing on the walls?
Well, dude, just reading this chapter has made me... I already ask a lot of questions, but this chapter is making me ask, like, okay, so what is that 43% of my day that is actually habitually run?
Right.
And I'm trying to look at, like, that's why, like, this whole discussion is so useful, because we're calling to mind the mechanisms of habit formation. So if that's the case,
some guy just chased a duck across my backyard. I'm very, very concerned, but
oh, nice.
Go on.
Nice. Was it the Aflac duck?
Dude, yeah, it sounded like it, but he was just
trying to
get
some good insurance.
Yeah, I think he was just feeling himself. He was trying to break a bad habit and replace it with duck chasing.
True.
But yeah, go on to about the 43% of your days.
Yeah. So I think just asking, like, what outcomes do I have by the end of my day? Like, do I feel that my days are productive? Like, asking the bigger questions, I think, can then taper into those smaller questions. Like, okay, so around this time every single day, what do I notice that I'm doing, and am I happy with that outcome? And I think as I start to ask those questions based off of this conversation that we're having, now that we've brought it to conscious awareness, it's like, dude, this is a huge tool now that we can use. So
yeah. And I think many people might look at this and say, like, this is all common sense. Like, whatever you do and repeat every day becomes a habit. Like, of course.
I mean, that's what the book said. It said, generally speaking, like, the laity has a pretty good understanding. It said the general public understands habits very well, but here's the kicker here, may not be able to distinguish between goal-directed and habit-directed behavior. That's the kicker here. So that's like determining the difference between system 1 and system 2, and essentially determining, like, the contextual elements.
Why it is you're doing the behavior that you're doing.
Right. Because habits become very subconscious. A lot of the habits are subconsciously operated.
Consciously, most of us just might have the awareness of, I'm doing XYZ behavior, and that's it. You know,
right?
Looking back into the why you're doing it is what we will continue to evolve on with our understanding. But thank you.
Exactly.
It's very, very enlightening. Look forward to our next. Are we going to do this at the same time next week so we can build a habit?
I mean, yeah, we should.
I got to drink out of the same mug at the same time. Wear the same outfit.
Realistically, we should, bro.
Smell the same coffee.
We should, for our viewers too, have a similar time every week.
I agree. Especially for the live streaming, the live-a-thons.
Yeah.
Because they can get pretty lengthy. I think an hour is pretty much our average here, but I think it'd be something great to look forward to. Leave a comment in the section below about what time you'd like to sit here and watch us talk about psychology and habits.
Lit. But
literature.
I think like literature.
Lit review. This has been a lit review, Daniel.
This book is just a fat lit review, bro.
It's a lit review.
It is a lit review of a lit review
of lit behaviors and habits.
And two lit boys.
We do be lit.
We do be lit. But
at this point, I'm just really enjoying being here. You know.
I think this is a good place to call it for live.
All right. Adios. Very nice. Have a good time.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, guys. We'll catch you all on the next one.
Next time.